They stormed toward my property so aggressively that for a moment I thought the lake itself might split in half. The HOA president, a woman whose voice could slice through brick, marched straight down my shoreline with a stack of papers clutched like weapons. "This lake," she declared, "belongs to us, and your docks fall under our jurisdiction effective immediately." Her confidence wasn't confidence, it was arrogance. And the worst part? Every member behind her nodded like they'd been rehearsing this takeover for weeks. They had no idea they were seconds away from the single most embarrassing moment of their HOA careers. I watched them spread out along the docks, stepping across the planks with the smug entitlement of people who assumed reality would bend simply because they spoke loudly enough. The president barked orders about restricted areas, community regulations, and mandatory compliance, each phrase delivered like a threat meant to intimidate me into silence. But I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even annoyed. I felt something closer to amusement, because the longer they strutted across the docks claiming authority, the harder their crash back to reality would hit. They believed the lake was theirs because someone misread a decades-old community map and decided it aligned with their agenda. They believed the docks were subject to their control because nobody had ever challenged their assumptions. They believed I was just another homeowner too scared of HOA letters to push back. They believed a lot of things. Unfortunately for them, every single belief they brought onto my property was wrong. I'd spent years preparing for this moment without even realizing it. My grandfather had passed down the shoreline to me along with every dock anchored into its soil. The ownership trail was flawless survey records, notarized deeds, and the original property boundaries drawn in permanent ink. These weren't documents that suggested ownership. They proved it in ironclad detail. So when the HOA president spun around and demanded I vacate their lakefront, I simply asked, "Are you absolutely sure this is your jurisdiction?" Her eyes hardened, and she snapped back, "It is. And if you refuse to comply, we will escalate this." That was my moment. Calm as the water behind me, I reached into my folder and pulled out the single sheet of paper that would shatter their entire operation. Ownership. Every dock. Every plank. Every inch they were standing on. And I was ready to watch the panic sink in. The HOA president stared at the document in my hand like it was written in another language. Her confidence cracked, but she tried to rebuild it fast, straightening her shoulders and announcing loudly to her board, "Don't be intimidated. These papers don't prove anything." But the tremble in her voice exposed her. The board members shifted uneasily on the dock, suddenly aware that every step they took might be on land they had no authority over. I could practically see the gears turning in their heads, realizing they might be trespassing without even knowing it. I held the document steady, letting the wind rustle the edges. "This," I said clearly, "is the original shoreline deed. Signed, notarized, and filed long before your HOA even existed. Everything from that tree line to the end of this dock has been private family property for decades." The president's eyes darted across the page, desperately searching for anything she could twist into an argument. But the text was clear, the signatures unmistakable, and the county seal impossible to dispute. One of the board members, a man who had been loudly agreeing with everything she said moments earlier, leaned forward to get a better look. His expression softened into shock, then discomfort, then something close to regret. Linda," he whispered to the president, "this looks official." She shot him a glare sharp enough to cut rope, but her authority was slipping through her fingers like sand. The small crowd of HOA volunteers who had marched in ready to enforce rules now stood awkwardly on the dock, glancing down at their feet. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They had stormed onto property they claimed to control, only to discover they were standing on something I owned outright. Every plank beneath them was a reminder of just how badly they'd overstepped. "You're misinterpreting this," the president insisted, though she sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than me. "The HOA bylaws clearly state," I cut her off gently, lifting another document from the folder. "Your bylaws stop at the community boundary. This shoreline? It's not inside it? The HOA never had jurisdiction here. You've been operating under a false assumption. Her face drained of color. The board members exchanged looks, silent, worried, calculating. They had marched in expecting to dominate. Instead, they were confronted with proof that they'd been enforcing imaginary rules. Every step they took now felt more like a mistake than a mission. For the first time, the president's voice faltered. We may need to review this. I smiled. Take your time. You'll find everything leads back to one truth. The lake and the docks were mine. By the next morning, the situation had exploded far beyond my neighborhood. Word of the lake scandal spread like wildfire thanks to my recording of the HOA's threats going viral in a local community group. What I didn't expect, though, was how the HOA would react. Instead of backing down, they doubled down. Hard. At 9 a.m. sharp, I heard the crunch of tires outside. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, only to see a convoy of HOA board members marching down the street like they were reenacting some kind of suburban military parade. Clipboards out. Polo shirts starched stiff. Their president, Diane, led the pack, chin pointed skyward as if she owned half the planet. Behind her, a freshly printed banner stretched between two folding stands. Private HOA property trespassers will be fined. I almost laughed. Almost. The group assembled at the edge of the lake, shouting orders as if they were preparing to launch an aquatic invasion. Within minutes, they hammered the banner into the ground and roped off several areas along the shore, areas they absolutely did not own. Neighbors gathered, watching the spectacle with a mix of confusion and discomfort. A few whispered among themselves. Others recorded from their phones. But everyone knew one thing: this was going too far. Diane spotted me. Her face tightened. There he is, she snapped. The one illegally using our docks. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. Diane, for the last time, the lake isn't yours. And neither are the docks. She jabbed a finger at the sign. This says otherwise. That's not how property law works. Her eyes narrowed. If you step foot on any dock today, we will fine you. And if you continue to resist the board's authority, we're prepared to involve law enforcement. That's when I noticed something interesting. Several neighbors were shifting uncomfortably, whispering things like, "Can they even do this? This feels wrong. Since when does the HOA own the water?" But before anyone could speak up, Diane raised her voice and declared, "We are taking full control of this lake immediately." I stared at her for a long moment. I had been patient, respectful, calm. But this was the line. If they wanted to turn this into a war, I was done holding back. I turned and walked back to my house, not because I was retreating, but because I was preparing the single document that would end this HOA power trip permanently. And when I brought it out, the HOA would never recover from what they were about to see. I walked back to my house with a calmness that almost felt unnatural, like the stillness before a storm finally breaks. Inside, I went straight to the fireproof lockbox under my desk. The hinges creaked as I opened it, and there they were, the papers I never thought I'd need to use. Proof. Legal proof. The kind that doesn't bend to threats, fines, or self-appointed authority. The original property deeds, signed decades ago by the previous owners, showing clearly and unmistakably that the lake and every single dock were privately owned by me. Not community shared property. Not HOA managed land. Mine. Legally. Fully. Completely. With the folder tucked under my arm, I stepped outside again. The HOA board was still gathered, arguing about where to put additional private property signs as if they were dividing up territory. My neighbors watched from a distance, hoping, praying someone would put an end to the madness. Diane spotted me returning and smirked with a confidence she absolutely did not deserve. "Back already, she taunted. Did you come to apologize? I walked past her, standing directly in front of the largest crowd of neighbors. I came to clear up a misunderstanding, I said. Diane crossed her arms. The only misunderstanding is you thinking you're above HOA rules. I held up the folder. Actually, this changes everything. She scoffed. What, some printouts from the internet? No, I replied, flipping open the first page. These are the original land deeds filed with the county. They show that the lake, the shoreline, and every dock are all privately owned. I paused for effect. By me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. 2 board members leaned forward to squint at the documents. A neighbor whispered, "Wait, is that real?" Diane snatched one of the pages from my hand with the desperation of someone watching their power crumble. Her eyes skimmed the text, then widened, then froze. This can't be right," she stammered. "It's very right," I said calmly. "Your HOA has absolutely zero authority over this lake. Or the docks. Or me. So your signs. Your fines. Your threats? All invalid?" Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. Another clapped. A few neighbors murmured things like, "I knew it, and they've gone too far this time." But Diane wasn't done. Her face reddened, her voice sharpened. "No. No. This doesn't change anything. You can't just—" "Diane," I interrupted gently, "the only thing I can't do is keep pretending you have power where you don't." For the first time since this began, she had no comeback. No threat. No rule to hide behind. Just silence. The meeting room buzzed with tension the moment I walked inside. Every board member sat rigidly, papers stacked neatly, pretending they still held control. Diane sat at the head, chin high, tapping her pen like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. But today, she wouldn't be the judge. She'd be the one judged. I placed a thick folder on the table. "Before we start," I said calmly, "I brought documents relevant to the lake dispute." Diane smirked, assuming I had come to surrender. "If this is another complaint," she snapped, "submit it through the portal." The smugness in her tone only fueled my determination. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. "This isn't a complaint," I said. "It's proof." I laid down the original deed, the survey map, and the notarized documentation showing private ownership of every dock. The room fell silent. Pens stopped tapping. Breathing stopped. Reality hit them like a wave. Diane leaned forward, scanning the papers. Her confidence wilted. These can't be accurate," she stuttered. "We have our own records." I pushed another document toward her. "Check the dates. Yours are copies made decades later. Mine are the originals." Board members whispered among themselves, panic spreading like wildfire. One member cleared his throat. "If these are valid, the HOA has no authority over the lake or docks." Another added, "We might be in violation, serious violation." Diane glared at them, but her authority was slipping away faster than she could grasp it. She tried one last desperate stand. "We acted in the community's best interest." I shook my head. "No. You acted on assumptions. And you trespassed on private property." Gasps echoed through the room. Even the most loyal board members backed away from her, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. Diane's face drained of color. She looked smaller than ever. Then came the final blow. I handed them a notice drafted by my attorney. "Since you imposed illegal restrictions and posted signs on my property, you're liable for damages. We can settle quietly, or publicly." No one wanted the public option. Not after seeing their mistakes in writing. Silence blanketed the room. Diane's voice cracked. "What do you want?" I stood tall. "Remove the signs. Apologize. and stay off my docks permanently. They agreed instantly. The battle was over. Their empire, built on ego and assumption, had collapsed. And for the first time, Diane had nothing left to say. As I left the room, the bored silence followed me like a shadow. Neighbors waiting outside watched the defeated HOA members exit one by one, their confidence shattered. Word spread. The truth finally belonged to all, and my lake was no longer a battlefield but a lesson they'd never forget. The news spread through the neighborhood faster than anyone expected. By sunrise the next day, nearly everyone knew the HOA had backed down, apologized, and officially recognized that I owned every dock on the lake. For a community used to their absolute control, this was nothing short of shocking. Neighbors approached me throughout the morning. Some offered congratulations. Others apologized for assuming the HOA had been honest. A few simply wanted to hear the full story from my perspective. It was strange, almost surreal, seeing people who once avoided conflict suddenly rally behind me. But the biggest surprise came when families began gathering at the lake again. Children skipped stones across the water. Couples walked along the shoreline. Even those who rarely socialized came out just to enjoy the peace that had briefly been stolen. The atmosphere felt lighter, freer, as if the entire community had exhaled at once. Yet Diane was nowhere to be seen. Rumors swirled that she had stepped down as president. Others said she was waiting for things to blow over. I didn't care either way. All I cared about was restoring the lake to what it should have always been, a place for everyone, not a battlefield for power-hungry board members. That afternoon, while repairing a loose railing on one of the docks, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw a small group of neighbors, people who had been terrified to speak against the HOA. One of them stepped forward hesitantly. "We want to thank you," he said. "You stood up for all of us." I shrugged. "I just stood up for what was right." "No," he insisted. "You stood up when none of us felt we could. That matters." Their words hit me harder than I expected. I had fought mainly to protect my property, my rights. But somewhere along the way, I had ended up defending everyone who felt bullied or intimidated by the very people meant to serve them. As the sun dipped over the water, casting golden reflections across the lake, I realized something: this win wasn't just mine. It belonged to the entire neighborhood. And maybe, just maybe, it marked the beginning of a better, more honest community. Still, I knew the HOA wouldn't remain quiet forever. Organizations like that rarely disappeared without trying to reclaim power. But this time, if they tried again, they wouldn't catch anyone off guard. Not me. Not the neighborhood. Not the lake. Everything had changed. Over the next few days, I watched the community grow braver, kinder, and far more united than before. People talked openly, questioned the board's decisions, and supported each other without hesitation. The lake, once a point of conflict, became the symbol of our collective strength. For a few peaceful days, I allowed myself to believe the storm had passed. The lake was calm. The neighbors were supportive. The HOA was unusually quiet. But quiet from people like them never meant surrender, it meant they were planning something. And they were. It started on a Tuesday morning. I received a thick envelope in the mail, stamped with the HOA's logo in bold ink. Inside was a 4-page letter filled with legal language, veiled threats, and desperate attempts to twist the situation back in their favor. They accused me of obstructing community operations, interfering with HOA authority, and my favorite, creating public hostility by revealing sensitive board documentation. In other words, they were angry I told the truth. Diane hadn't signed it. The new interim president had. A man named Collins, a quieter, more calculating type. Someone who smiled like a politician and wrote like a lawyer. He clearly believed he could succeed where Diane had failed. But the letter wasn't their only move. By noon, new signs appeared near the lake. These weren't the aggressive red ones Diane posted, but neatly printed blue ones with softened language. Pending review of lake access protocols. Temporary restrictions for community compliance. Awaiting resolution with property owner. It was all an illusion of professionalism, a prettier mask for the same old power grab. The neighbors noticed immediately. Some were confused. Others anxious. Many came straight to me, holding copies of the letter they had also received. Collins had blasted it to every household, painting himself as the hero stepping in to correct ownership misunderstandings. The manipulation was bold, calculated, infuriating. I knew I had two options. Ignore their attempt to claw back control. Or shut it down publicly, decisively, and permanently. I chose the latter. That evening, I called for a community gathering at the lake. Word spread faster than Collins expected. Dozens showed up. Some angry, some curious, all tired of the HOAs games. As the sun set behind the water, casting a soft orange glow across the crowd, I stepped forward with a folder under my arm. This, I announced, holding up the deed, hasn't changed. The ownership hasn't changed. The truth hasn't changed. But the HOA is trying to make you believe it has. People murmured, shaking their heads. Their new signs aren't legal, I continued. Their letter isn't enforceable. And their attempt to disguise control as protocol review is nothing more than another power play. The crowd erupted in agreement. And for the first time, I realized Collins had made a huge miscalculation. He had underestimated how much the neighborhood had changed. They weren't scared anymore. They were ready to fight back with me. The next morning, the lakefront looked completely different, not because of anything the HOA did, but because of what the neighborhood had done. Overnight, dozens of handwritten signs, posters, and printed sheets had appeared beside the HOA's protocol review notices. They weren't vandalism. They were statements. Some read: the lake belongs to its true owner. Stop the HOA power games. We support the community, not control. The neighbors weren't silent anymore. They weren't scared. They were unified. I stood at the shoreline, speechless, as more people gathered. Parents with their kids. Retirees with folding chairs. Teenagers recording everything. It felt less like a protest and more like a community reclaiming its identity. Collins arrived shortly after, walking briskly with two board members behind him. His confident smile had vanished. He looked rattled, maybe even overwhelmed. He tried to remove one of the handwritten signs, but a neighbor stepped forward. "Touch that," she warned, "and you'll be the one violating community rules." Collins froze. This wasn't the reaction he expected. He cleared his throat. "We appreciate your concerns," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But the HOA is only trying to ensure the lake is managed properly. We're within our rights to review access." I stepped forward, holding the deed again, not waving it, not flaunting it, just presenting it like the truth it was. "You don't get to review access to something you don't own," I said calmly. "And this community knows it." People nodded. A few clapped. Collins' expression tightened. He gestured toward the lake. "Whether you own the docks or not, the HOA bylaws clearly state." "Bylaws don't override property rights," a neighbor interrupted. "Stop pretending they do." Another neighbor added, "We're done being pushed around." The crowd murmured louder, building momentum. Collins tried to redirect. "Let's keep emotions out of this." Too late. This wasn't emotion. This was resolve. I stepped closer to him. "Remove your signs. Withdraw your letter. And stop harassing the community with legal threats. Do it today." He hesitated, eyes darting around at the sea of determined faces. The board members behind him backed away. One whispered something, and Collins' shoulders sank. He knew he had lost, not to me alone, but to an entire neighborhood that refused to bend anymore. "I'll bring this matter to the full board," he muttered weakly. "No," I replied. "Bring it to an end." The crowd cheered not loudly, but firmly, like a wave of agreement rolling across the lake. And in that moment, Collins understood that this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. For 2 days after the confrontation at the lake, the neighborhood held its breath. No new signs appeared. No letters. No warnings slipped onto doorsteps. Even the usual HOA patrols vanished. It was as if the board had disappeared into hiding, collecting the shattered pieces of their authority and trying to glue them back together. But on the third day, something finally happened. Late in the afternoon, a message was sent out, one simple email addressed to every homeowner. No threats. No legal jargon. No clever manipulation. Just a single paragraph signed by Collins himself. After consulting legal counsel and reviewing historical property documentation, the HOA acknowledges that the community lake and its docks are privately owned. All restrictions, notices, and signs previously posted have been rescinded. We apologize for any confusion or inconvenience. Confusion. Inconvenience. That was the most diplomatic way possible of saying we were wrong. Completely. Utterly. Embarrassingly wrong. Within minutes, my phone exploded with messages from neighbors. Screenshots of the email. Celebrations. Relief. Laughing emojis. Even people who rarely interacted reached out to thank me. Some said they felt like the community had taken its first real breath in years. But the real closure came that evening. As the sun dipped below the trees, I walked down to the docks, and found the entire neighborhood gathering again. Kids splashed water at each other. Parents grilled food. Older couples watched from lawn chairs. The lake was no longer a battleground, it was alive again. Then something unexpected happened. The interim president, Collins, approached me. No entourage. No clipboard. No fake politician smile. Just a man who finally understood the weight of the mess he had stepped into. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "You owe the community one," I replied. He nodded. "You're right." And without hesitation, he turned toward the crowd and raised his voice. "I want everyone to hear this. The HOA was wrong. Completely. And moving forward, we will operate with transparency, respect, and boundaries. No more overreach. No more intimidation. No more treating homeowners like obstacles." The crowd applauded not wildly, but sincerely. A cautious optimism. I looked around at the lake, the sunset dancing on the water, the restored peace, the sense of unity that had risen from conflict. This wasn't just a victory for me. It was a reset button for the entire neighborhood. And as I stood on the dock that started it all, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. The HOA tried to seize the lake. They tried to seize control. They tried to seize dignity. But in the end, we seized our community back. Together.